Hey folks, today we're going to look at two of my oldest tanks. Both of these tanks were made by Marineland and they represent some of my earliest attempts at aquascaping. We're going to look and see where they are today, right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec and welcome back to my update palooza. If you haven't watched in a few weeks, I've opted to opt out of the all aquarium update that I usually do every 6 months and instead focus in on those same tanks that I would have showed you in a little bit more focused manner, so we could kind of like get them in bite-sized pieces and really look at the progress and kind of talk about keeping them. So if you're curious and you haven't seen it already, I encourage you to check out last week's video with the specs, or the week before that where I show you my Fluval Flex tanks. I have a lot of different types of aquariums, and I think next week I'm probably going to focus in on some nanos, and I'm waiting to do the 210 a little bit longer until I get, I'd like to get up to the 2-year mark, because I'm coming real close to 2 years from that, and I'll probably post a 2-year update to kind of bookend this series. The tank I'm in front of right now is a 57-gallon column tank. It's very commonly available at PetSmart. I still see it at PetSmart all the time. I think the tank and stand were sold together. It had kind of a crappy light that came on it. No filter, as I recall. And yeah, it was a pretty neat buy though. I think it was less than $250 for the whole tank and stand thing. So this tank, it turns out, was about 8 years ago. Also, it was the 8th aquarium video that I ever made for YouTube. If you want to go check it out, it is definitely early on in my YouTube.
What do you plan to put in this tank other than, plants and driftwood?
Fish, I imagine. It's called a Planted Tank Journal because it's only 13 minutes long. And I remember in the comments, people talking about how long it was. The other thing is it's over the course of about 2 months. So it's not just me setting it up. It's me setting it up and putting plants in it and kind of dealing with stuff. And again, it was an early video, not my best video, but I'm not completely embarrassed of it either. Because, yeah, I think I did all right considering what I knew at the time. What's cool though is I haven't changed it a whole lot since then. Some of the plants, of course, came and went. If you look at the setup video for this, I had one small bit of Cophophilia that I brought over from a 20-gallon tank, and now it's like all over the tank. I mean, literally, there's this Anubias has grown all the way around, and I've broken it apart and replanted it and broken apart and put it other places. There's some in the 210. There's some of this plant all over the place. Some of the crypts at the bottom are from the original tank. This tank is the tank where I bought a very popular plant that I had, or I get a lot of questions about it, called the Vesuvius sword. If you remember back in the Flex tanks, that's the offspring of the original plant that I bought for this tank. Ultimately, I think it was starting to die out, and it was getting kind of scrawny in there, and I moved it out of this tank and into other ones, but I think it actually went into a spec 5-gallon for a while, and then it's bounced around to a bunch of different tanks. But yeah, it started in this tank. All the substrate's the same, and I believe it's Eco Complete, and I used a mixture of two sort of inert substrates. I know one was Eco Complete, but it was kind of expensive at the time, so I think I cut it with another one. Then I decided it was too dark. The Eco Complete was just kind of stark black, and I put some pebbles across the top. The most recent change I've made with this is, as you might recall, recently I got the Wassa canister filter, and I've added that underneath. That's worked out really well. The flow on it's a bit slower, and if you watch the demonstration that I filmed where the gentleman came and talked about the filters, that they explain that it doesn't have the flow rate of a lot of other filters, and that seems pretty apparent. The thought behind it is that the way it lets the water move more slowly past all the media, thus giving it more of a chance to kind of interact with it and do all the good things that it's going to do inside there. And I have to say, my water's been really clear. I haven't had a lot of problems. Really, the only thing with it that have happened is on one occasion, I noticed it was clacking and making a little bit of noise. Not a lot of noise, but just enough to kind of worry that maybe something was wrong. I turned the power off, let it set for just a second, and turned it back on, and it went away, and it completely stopped. So I wasn't sure what that was, but I did want to mention that, you know, I have heard clacking. Starting it back up, it seems to take a while to kind of get everything going again, get the air bubbles out. I do the plunge, you know, to kind of get as much of the air out as possible, and then I kind of start it. Then I move on with the rest of my maintenance, and I come back just to make sure. But every time I've come back, the filter's running just fine, and everything's good. I didn't have any die-off or anything switching out the filters. Of course, I took a bunch of used media and then added even more. So I wouldn't imagine there would be a huge problem. But so far, so good. It's a good fit for this tank. I found it's really easy to pull out those sponges. That's really nice. The big advantage of the Fluval G series filter is that you could pull out those little pre-filters and clean them. And that made keeping the pre-filters really easy to clean. And the same's true in this. It's probably its best feature, by far its best feature, is being able to pull out those sponges and just rinse them out. And what I do is I'll pull them out, I'll put them in a sink, and I'll swap them out with fresh ones that I cleaned last time. I stick it right back in there, so the maintenance for that's really quick. Then I just go back and kind of rinse out the sponges in some tap water, and I let them sit, and that's it. This is a pretty heavily populated tank. It's got a lot of the kind of miscellaneous tetra fish that I had in the 55 that I broke down this year. It's also got the baby rainbows. Those are the offspring of the rainbows from downstairs. If you've been watching the videos for a while, you'll know that I saw some babies just kind of swimming around in here one day, and I started gathering them up, and I ended up with like maybe 8 or 9 of those things. They grew up in other little tanks that I had going off over on the other side of the room by the bed for a long time. And then eventually, as I moved things around, and I took the parents down to the 210, and I brought them in here. And they've been kind of getting bigger and more colorful every day. I'm hoping when they get just a little bit bigger, I'm going to add them to the 210 downstairs and kind of put the whole family back together. And there'll be a nice big school of them then. I've got some other cool fish in here, like a Pandagara. I love Pandagaras. And I've got a really neat bristlenose. It's really beautiful, fire red bristlenose. But unfortunately, he's in sort of a hiding mood and will not come out for me whatsoever. One thing that's interesting about these two tanks is they kind of taught me an important aquascaping tip that I can share with you now. One of my favorite woods was always Malaysian driftwood, mainly because it was the main wood that we could get in town. Like, I could easily find it at a couple of the local fish stores that were around 8 years ago. The other thing is that it sank immediately, so I would soak it to kind of get some tannins out, but I didn't have to soak it in order to sink it. In other words, I didn't have to sweat that I got it soaked enough for it to sink, and I didn't have any problems with it floating up when I was trying to, do things. The other thing that's cool about Malaysian driftwood is just the way it looks. It's got a real nice wood look, even when it breaks apart, it's got some kind of dramatic shapes that you can find it in, and it's all twisted and stuff, and if you get the right specimen. Okay, but there's always a downside, right? So for some people, the downside is just the tannins. So for the first year or so that your wood is in there, it's going to slough off a little bit of tannins. If you don't soak it really good at first, you're going to get a lot, like a tea-colored amount of tannins into your tank. This won't hurt your fish, and it's not even bad. It's not really a bad thing. But for a lot of people, it's just not fun to look at. It can give the impression of a dirty aquarium to people that are uninitiated. Fools! Hey, dirty fool! But bar none, my biggest problem with Malaysian driftwood is that it sloughs off so much of itself, it just makes a mess. And where it makes a mess is usually inside of your filter. So here's where the comparison comes in. When I set up this tank, I did a huge piece of Malaysian driftwood. I searched and searched to find this perfect piece that you can just barely see now. I mean, it's in there, and when you're standing, I think when you're sitting in front of it, it's more apparent than than maybe watching it on a video. But where I really see it is in the filter when I'm cleaning the pre-filters. This happened in the 55 too. Both times I used it, I had a giant piece of Malaysian driftwood. It actually sloughed off so much extra wood. I think it made kind of a nice planting substrate in the bottom of the tank. Like there was a pretty thick layer of just like wood that had come off the side of it. It was interesting too, because both in this piece and my other big piece of driftwood, I've seen it just gradually shrink over the years. It's kind of kept a very similar shape, but it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so all my filters, the filters that I used for the 55, both times I set it up, the filters for this, they're always full of that sloughed off wood. It clogs your filters. It's always omnipresent, kind of getting on things. It's not bad for plants. You don't necessarily see it a whole lot. It's not terrible, but you definitely see it in your filters because it's just coming off all the time. And the reason I know is when I clean this filter, even after a regular maintenance period where I haven't slacked off at all, I'm doing it on time, my filters are just full of that wood, that brown stuff. I go to clean it and it's full. Whereas the tank downstairs, the 20-gallon, I almost never clean out the sponges in that because it's almost always just pristine and clean. There's hardly any wood or detritus or anything in there. I mean, it looks like I just cleaned it when I go in there. And the biggest difference is downstairs, I use spider wood. Spider wood's really similar in a lot of ways. It's usually more spindly. It's got a lot more, it's a lot thinner. It's a lot thinner, more branchy type of wood. And the really fine pieces of it are going to disintegrate really quickly. But the spider wood seems to just not slough off wood at all. It will kind of rot down and break down over time, but it leaves nothing in the filter. It's a much cleaner piece of aquascaping material, and a high recommendation from me. So this aquarium is in my bedroom, along with 2 other aquariums, and so I get to listen to it in the dark a lot. I have to say, this filter has been really quiet. It's not noticeable at all. In fact, that I've got the spec 5-gallon literally right next to my head. Both very quiet aquariums. Honestly, the loudest thing that I hear are my old school timers that kind of rattle, and you can really hear them when it gets quiet in the room. I probably should shoot more videos up here because, frankly, the sound is a lot quieter than it is in the other rooms. For light on here, I've got a Pecktec Planet Plus. This is like the 3rd or 4th light I've tried on this. I started with a compact fluorescent, like a 265-watt bulbs, and I went for several years with that. Honestly, don't do a lot to maintain this tank. I, of course, change the mechanical filtration as I'm doing the water change. I'll do a water change that's about 20%. It'll end up being about to here. I'll trim plants when they get too thick or they start looking weird in ways I don't like. This is another one I tend to have a lot of frog bit in. I've cleaned most of it out now, but I keep a lot of frog bit in here too, and I periodically have to take that out and just throw it away. It's funny, you always start off with like an aquascape idea for tanks like this, but over time, your interest goes up and down, and really what you're going to do is just kind of watch it grow. And it's been great, close to a decade, and things are still growing in here. I haven't added any root tabs. I don't do any fertilizer. I'm not adding anything to this except water, the water from my tap and dechlorinator. I think in the past I've tried different things in here, but never with any great deal of consistency. For the most part, these are mostly Anubias plants. There's a couple of pieces of Nana. A lot of it's Coprophylla. I've got a couple other plants I just don't know the names of anymore. A couple of Crypts in here too, and some Java Fern, and kind of a mix of easy low light plants. Oh hey, I forgot about you. Also have a Pearl Grommy that likes to hide a lot. Okay, so 3 years after I set up this tank, it was time to try out another Marineland kit, and that is the 27-gallon cube. That tank actually sat empty in different areas of my house for a long time while I sorted out actually where I wanted to put it. And for a while, it was going to be my steampunk tank. That was my original idea for the steampunk tank, I couldn't figure out exactly how to do some of the things that I wanted to do. So I just went ahead and set it up one day. I got tired of trying to figure out how to make it a steampunk tank and just made an aquarium. I wouldn't fulfill my steampunk ambitions till much later. So that video was one of the first setup videos where I decided that I didn't want to just shoot a video over the course of several months. I wanted to kind of like take you along as I was putting it together. And I was starting to get more and more questions for things, and so I decided to get more specific. So when I set up the 27-gallon cube, I actually made a few videos, one describing just the substrate that was in it, and another one talking about the light, and I think one about hardscape, where I first discussed spiderwood and what it is, what it really is. And then I did a live stream where I set up the whole thing, or most of it, I think, on a live stream. The light I eventually used on a bunch of other tanks. It was really small for this tank. It came with like this small double bright LED, I think is what it was. But I ended up putting that on some 10-gallon nano tank later on down the line. And I think it eventually migrated its way over to my sister's house. A tank I haven't looked at in a long time. That's again a very early video for me. But I was starting to kind of get the hang of YouTube, and I'm always nostalgic when I look back and see some of the work that I did before. The tank is very overgrown. It's a tank it's my wife's favorite tank. That one and this one are both my wife's favorite tank, which is why they've survived so long. It again has some scratches in the front that kind of bug me. They aren't so apparent, that it makes the tank ugly or anything, but I just wish I could flip that thing backwards. I do put a little bit of fertilizer in. I put a little bit of Flourish iron into all the tanks downstairs just because I keep it in my fridge. I keep it kind of ready to go. And I like to add a little bit of that to the tanks downstairs just to give the plants a little bit of a boost. It's important to be super consistent when you're adding fertilizer, so I just incorporate that into my water change routine. And it's probably not as much as what's recommended on the bottle, but it gets a little bit of extra in there. The plants are getting a little bit of a boost from the fresh water, which should have fresh minerals and other micronutrients in there anyway. The tank still has quite a few fish in it. A lot of them hide in kind of the dense plants. I've got two cool bristlenose plecos, a nice yellow one, and a long fin red bristlenose. Also have a betta that I bought a long time ago, or a couple of years ago, I think. It was originally in the face tank. I named him Albert. And it was a koi betta, and everybody was talking about the marble gene and how it would change. Well, this is what he looks like today. He's pretty much turned into sort of this muted red color, kind of a blotchy red color, but he gets along well with the shrimp and stuff in there. By far, the biggest population of cherry red shrimp I have is in this tank. They have kind of taken over in the absence of a lot of big predators. One fish that used to live in this tank that I've graduated over to the 210, only because I basically had to drain almost the whole tank just to catch him, was the yo-yo loach. The yo-yo loach is one of my oldest fish, and I had a special request from a viewer who wanted to see him when I showed the tanks. Well, he's actually in the 210, and maybe there'll be a few more stories about him when I get there, but that fish has been around a lot of my tanks for a long time. I've had him longer than I've had a YouTube channel, so he's getting pretty old now. The 27 gallon started off with CO2. I'm not running CO2 in it at all. It gets a little bit of the Flourish iron, but there's not especially a lot of care. So in this tank or the cube, I don't do any gravel vacuuming whatsoever. I'll kind of come around the surface and pick up stuff that's maybe floating around near the top layer. But I don't have any mulm or anything like that. The plants are absorbing and taking care of a lot of the nutrients that are in there. I've got a Fluval 207 canister filter underneath that I never have to clean. It's really, really low maintenance. I do pull it out and I'll switch out a little bit of the biological and sort of give the sponges a clean. But I'm telling you, it's uncanny how clean the sponges are in that particular tank. See a lot of videos on the internet talking about no maintenance tanks. And I would argue that the best you're ever going to achieve is low maintenance tanks. That is definitely what I have going on here and downstairs. Just let the plants kind of go nuts. Every now and then I'll pull plants out and I'll add them to other tanks. Right now my goal is to get the 210 to go nuts. So I keep taking plants out of the cube and migrating them over to the 210. I've got some floating there right now that I need to plant. I guess the trickiest part is letting the plants go nuts and also, making it an attractive aquascape. I could almost call these a no maintenance tank, although if you're doing water changes, you're doing maintenance. But it took years and years to get there. It took a lot of balancing and a lot of plant growth to get to the point where I wasn't having major issues every now and then. Because I keep a pretty decent routine with my maintenance, I've never plagued with issues. But I would argue over the first 2 to 3 years, you could have all sorts of different kinds of problems, and you'll have your really good periods and your really bad periods. But if you wait it out and things keep growing and you're able to keep the tank going, the reward will be something easy to keep, as long as you're not too particular about how overgrown you get. Overgrown is my goal now. It's the only way I can keep so many tanks going, is to have a couple that have just been very successful and are just very easy to keep. Of course, one way to do that is to sort of tone down your fish population. It doesn't have to be wall-to-wall fish in there necessarily, but you can have pretty decent populations like this, where this tank has, they're all hiding right now, but this tank has quite a few fish in it, and it doesn't require much more maintenance than my tanks that are almost empty. But folks, that's about all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Now, as you know, I've been giving away all through the month of November. I've been giving away filters. I've given away 3 Marineland 375 Pro filters. Well, I've given away 2. I'm about to give away a 3rd one to this person. All right, it's time to pick another winner. The cold robot hands of fate will select a winner from the comments. Who will it be? Who will the finger touch the dark robotic fingers of fate? Joseph McKenzie. Love the outtakes. Cool to hear how you got started too. Congratulations. I hope you enjoy your new filter. I'll be sending that out to you as soon as I get your address. And now, this week, to sort of wrap up the contest, I'm giving away 2 filters. Now, these will be the polishing filters that Marineland sent. 2 filters in this video. All you need to do to enter is comment down below. You can find more details about the rules and the drawing in the description. It's for U.S. residents only. I'm sorry about that. I'll be picking the winner on Saturday at some point. You'll know I picked a winner or not by whether or not there's a pinned comment. If you have a question about what a pinned comment is, just look at the last video and you'll see the pinned comment there. It just means the comment's stuck at the top, and that way we'll know. Now obviously there'll be 2 winners. I'm going to notify both people about I'll only be able to pin 1 comment. I hope that makes sense. So good luck with that. It's been a great giveaway. Thank you so much to Marineland for sponsoring that. Next week's video is going to be sort of a miscellaneous collection of custom aquariums that I have. I think that would be a good title, the custom aquarium. So that would be like the face tank, the one where I made the sculpture for that, and maybe the steampunk tank, as well as the maybe the 20 gallon, since I put that corner filter in there. So it'll be a collection of other nanos, and that's coming up next week. Until then, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. If you haven't watched in a few... The most recent change, as you might remember, is recently I picked up... One thing I've really learned about I've learned a lot about what's interesting about these 2 tanks. This pre-filters, I'll trim plants when they get too planted. I broke that video till... That tank has sort of comparatively... That tank has compared... he's pretty much kind of turned it... He's turned it... Now these will be the polishing filters that Marineland sent. And come on.